Welcome back. If the Trump administration wants to cut a lasting deal with North Korea, they'll probably are going to have to sell it to Congress. The lack of a congressionally ratified deal is what ended up sinking President Obama's deal with Iran. So what does Congress think? Joining me now is somebody who took the lead on taking on President Obama in the Iran deal. It's Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton. And I'm curious what he thinks of this deal now. Senator Cotton, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chuck, it's good to be on with you.
So I've seen what you've said to Hugh, and I know you're sort of, I guess you're a cautious skeptic or an optimistic skeptic. But what is the role you want Congress to play on this deal? And do you want it to be just as stringent as what you did with the Obama administration and the Iran deal?
Well, Chuck, let me address your first point first. I think it's important to say that we don't yet have a deal with North Korea. We have commitments from Kim Jong-un to denuclearize North Korea. But as the president said in his press conference earlier today, it's going to take many months to negotiate that out, with Secretary Pompeo leading the negotiations on our side. And we should be skeptical because of the Kim family's long history of duplicity in these kind of negotiations. Whatever happens, however, I think it will be a durable agreement, and it will have longevity that other agreements have not in the past if Congress, or I should say the Senate, ratifies it as a treaty. Secretary Pompeo said he wants to do that, as has the president. When you get 67 senators to agree to anything, that by definition represents a widespread, broad, bipartisan agreement among the American people. That's the way to have a durable, stable, lasting agreement with North Korea if Kim Jong-un is serious about his commitments.
I want to bring up a statement you put out about a month ago. You wrote this: North Korea has a long history of demanding concessions merely to negotiate. While past administrations of both parties have fallen for this ruse, I commend the president for seeing through Kim Jong-un's fraud. As I've long said, our maximum pressure campaign on North Korea must continue. Now, you put out that statement in that 48-hour period where I think the president canceled the summit. Then it went back on. I have to say, it certainly looks to me as if the president gave concessions in order to negotiate, which is what you were hoping he wouldn't do here. What do you think changed?
Well, Chuck, I think the main point is that the president hasn't given any concessions on the most important measures we have that brought North Korea to the negotiating table, which is our maximum pressure campaign of economic sanctions and financial isolation and interdiction of illicit shipments at sea. The meeting today was a meeting that needed to occur on a face-to-face basis to start down these negotiating next steps. But past administrations of both parties have been too willing to relax sanctions on North Korea simply for the fact of sitting down to start negotiating, or for easily reverse promise. That's what President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have said we will not do, and I don't expect we will in the months ahead.
The president, though, already gave a huge concession as far as some are concerned by, number one, calling off military exercises with South Korea, and number two, calling them provocative and war games, which is the rhetoric of China and North Korea.
Chuck, I think the Secretary of Defense has since come out and said he was aware of the president's decision and he supports it, will maintain full readiness. We continue our day-to-day training exercises with South Korean troops. Also, the single biggest exercise we conduct with South Korean troops every year, Foal Eagle, just occurred about a month ago. So we'll have 10 or 11 months before that exercise begins again to know whether Kim Jong-un is keeping his commitments. And I'm pretty confident we'll know well in advance of that time whether he is keeping his commitments. And if not,
doesn't sound like you would have advised the president to put that on the table in this first meeting.
I would simply have said we should continue to negotiate at the ministerial level, Secretary Pompeo and maybe Kim Jong-il, with whom he met in New York. But again, the biggest single exercise we have happens in the spring. It just happens. We have about 10 or 11 months before it happens again. Secretary Mattis has said it won't impair our readiness. Our troops on the South Korean peninsula will remain ready to fight tonight.
The president, though, does seem intent on eventually getting the U.S. military out of that region, out of South Korea. I was just talking with Ambassador Hill, as he said, there's 3,000 years of historical reasons, historical evidence as to why the Koreans aren't interested in China being their security umbrella, and that they still would like the United States to be that security umbrella. Are you concerned that the president doesn't believe in these security umbrellas for our allies?
No, I think the president recognizes that South Korea and Japan are our two critical partners in Northeast Asia. We have a large number of troops in both countries. Both countries pay most of the cost of having those troops there. One thing that I think the president is acknowledging, though, is if we do have, a breakthrough with North Korea, not just to denuclearize, but perhaps to allow the Korean peoples to begin to negotiate to finally sign a peace treaty 53 years after the Korean War ended, and maybe potentially even reunify as Germany did after the fall of the Cold War, then we would reconsider our posture on the Korean Peninsula. But, Chuck, that's years away. The immediate thing we have to do is make sure that we denuclearize North Korea, holding Kim Jong-un to his commitments. In the meantime, continue our military presence in South Korea and Japan, which is a guarantee of stability in that region, which is so critical to our economic security as well.
I want to ask you about ZTE. You, I think, in a bipartisan way, have been among the leaders in this, of essentially pushing back on the Trump administration for cutting a deal to try to resurrect ZTE. You have said you believe the death penalty for this company, this Chinese-based telecommunication company, is in fact good policy. Why was the Trump administration trying to negotiate a deal for ZTE? Why are they trying to prop up this company back up?
Well, Chuck, ZTE and Huawei and essentially any Chinese telecom company is an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. But let's put this decision in context. For 8 years, ZTE and Huawei ran wild. ZTE became the fourth largest telecom company in the world. When the president took office, he began to change that. And in fact, earlier this year, they issued an order that was essentially the death penalty on ZTE because it prevented them from getting access to critical American goods that they needed to do business. Xi Jinping personally pleaded with him to negotiate it down to life without parole, if you will. I think the death penalty is the right penalty for ZTE's behavior and for their work with the Chinese Communist Party.
Are you confident that the president won't veto essentially the defense authorization bill? This is what it would be linked to, that he won't veto it over this?
I am, Chuck. The annual defense authorization bill contains the authorization for many critical programs that keep our country safe and support our troops and their families. We have many months to go on this. I'm pleased that 100 senators agreed with me on the threat that companies like ZTE and Huawei pose to America, but we still have to negotiate with the House and then send it to the president for his signature. Whatever happens on this particular bill, though, the American people need to know that companies like ZTE and Huawei are a threat to our national security and a threat to their privacy.
Would you ever use a phone that was had ZTE service?
No, and I hope you wouldn't either, Chuck. And in fact, I've asked that question of every leader of our intelligence community in open hearings, and not a single one have said that they would use it. And in fact, I said that's not really a fair question since you're all leading intelligence agencies. What about members of your church or your family or your neighbors? And they said they wouldn't recommend for anyone to use a ZTE or Huawei telephone or product.
Well, that does say a lot. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas. Thank you, sir, for coming on and sharing your views. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Chuck.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.